So good evening, everyone. Let's bow in. Welcome to the course, The Buddhist Path of Awakening. We are making our way through the book Shambhala, The Sacred Path of the Warrior by Chogyam Trungpa. And tonight we're discussing chapter 20, having to do with authentic presence. It's called Wang Tang in Tibetan. And we're going to start with Michael tonight. Michael?
Yes, well, welcome everyone. This is a chapter where there's more than meets the eye, and quite a bit meets the eye at the same time. Along with the previous chapter on Universal Monarch, where we talked about letting go of any reference point and just relating with space, a very fruitional chapter. But at the same time, really, we were introduced to fruition at the very beginning of the book when Trungpa Rinpoche presented Discovering Basic Goodness. The difference here with authentic presence is at this point, we're so steeped in our practice and so thoroughly familiar with our basic goodness that we fully identify with that, and that there's no separation. It's not a question of basic goodness being something we need to look for, or something that we have, or something that we can experience or not. It's literally who we are. So there's a real change of identification. And in this way, Trungpa Rinpoche's presentation of the Shambhala teachings is entirely consistent with Vajrayana presentation altogether. There's a point in the middle of this chapter where he talks about authentic presence being both ground and fruition. But you could say the same thing about basic goodness as well, that it's where we start and it's where we end up. Although perhaps where we end up is something like what T.S. Eliot says, we come to know this place for the very first time. Any case, he begins the chapter by saying that achieving the realization of the universal monarch, which we talked about in the previous chapter, is the fruition of developing authentic presence. So we're talking about something that at best we can only point to with words, and that ultimately it's something we actually experience. It's literally something that we are. And what happens throughout this chapter is Trungpa Rinpoche will point out attributes that we can recognize in our experience because we have flashes of basic goodness, flashes of authentic presence. And it's helpful to have these pointed out so that we can recognize them, perhaps rest in them, as we'll talk about a little bit later. Allow them to occur when we do recognize them. So again, the point is it's very helpful to study this material in terms of recognizing what our potentiality is. But the basic idea is that we experience authentic presence when we literally are being fully present, that he's really talking about just simple being resting in our basic goodness, becoming fully awake. And this is our true nature. There are many words for it in different Buddhist traditions, bodhicitta, rigpa, ordinary mind. But the basic idea is that this is who we are, although we don't recognize that. And along with this, he presents the notion of, in this chapter, of a gradual and sudden path. Because at any time we are able to recognize our basic goodness, recognize and experience authentic presence. And I'll just, begin talking about the chapter, but leave off with a quote from Suzuki Roshi that kind of gets at this paradox of ground and fruition. He says, "You are perfect as you are, and you could use some improvement." So you can contemplate that one as a koan for a long time. In any case, to go into the chapter, Trungpa Rinpoche says that in Tibetan, authentic presence is Wangtong, which literally means field of power, but it's more loosely translated as authentic presence or Wangtong. And when we think about it, we actually spend a lot of our time not being present and not being authentic. So this is actually a fairly radical experience in one sense. And at the same time, it's true to who we actually are. So again, it's paradoxical, and that's why it's both ground and fruition. He said the basic idea of authentic presence is that because you achieve some merit or virtue, which is what we develop through our practice, therefore that virtue begins to be reflected in our being, our presence. So authentic presence is based on cause and effect. Merit is the cause, authentic presence is the effect. I'm going to go through some definitions of different words tonight as well. Trungpa Rinpoche, I believe, had a Oxford English dictionary that he actually worked with quite a bit. And his use of language was very precise, if not at times somewhat unusual, so that he meant exactly what he meant. So one definition of authentic is of undisputed origin, that it's genuine, it's truly something as it's said to be. And I think this gets back again to this notion that our true nature, our primordial nature, is basic goodness, which we were introduced to right at the beginning of the book. And that what we're actually talking about is fully being ourselves, without deception, without confusion, without falling into habitual patterns. So in any case, he goes on to talk about outer and inner authentic presence. Outer authentic presence, he says, really anyone could experience, so long as they have some modesty and decency. Then they'll show some sense of good and wholesome being around them. This is kind of perhaps more like ordinary charisma, we might say. But the inner meaning of authentic presence is connected with the path of warriorship, which we'll be talking about tonight, and comes not just from being a decent and good person, but is connected to the realization of primordial space or egolessness, emptying out, letting go of everything that obscures our basic goodness. The idea in any Vajrayana path is that whatever obscuration we might experience, karmic, whatever, is considered temporary and not fundamental to who we are. It's like something on one analogy given once was, it's like dirt on a dish that you can wash off. The dish itself is not affected at all by the dirt. And in the same way, our fundamental nature, our true nature, our basic goodness is never affected by temporary obscurations, temporary obstacles, temporary confusions that we might experience. So as we empty out and let go of our habitual patterns, this becomes clearer and clearer to us. He says that the cause of virtue that brings inner authentic presence is emptying out and letting go. We have to be without clinging. Inner authentic presence comes as also from being able to exchange self with others, with compassion, from being able to regard other people as ourselves, and that we do so generously and without fixation. So the inner merit that brings inner authentic presence is the experience of non-fixed mind without fixation. So, and the idea here again is that any fixation we do experience, any reference point we cling to, is temporary, and it's not fundamental to who we are. He says such a person who experiences inner authentic presence or manifests inner authentic presence has an overwhelming genuineness which might be somewhat frightening because it's so true and honest and real. Perhaps we've met people like this in our lives. Actually, Henry David Thoreau in Walden says exactly the same thing. He says, to be awake is to be alive. I have never yet met a man who is quite awake. How could I have looked him in the face? And he goes on to say, we must learn to reawaken and keep ourselves awake, not by mechanical aids, but by an infinite expectation of the dawn, which does not forsake us in our soundest sleep. So very interestingly, 200 years before, before this book, The Shambhala Path of the Warrior was published, he's also talking about this expectation of the dawn, the rise, the great Eastern Sun vision. In any case, when we do experience someone with inner authentic presence, we experience a sense of command coming from them, radiating from that person, the inner authentic presence. And he says that this person could be a taxi driver or a garbage collector. Still, this person shows an uplifted quality which magnetizes us and commands our attention. And this is not just charisma, but the person with inner authentic presence has worked on themselves and made a proper and thorough journey. They have earned authentic presence by letting go and by giving up personal comfort and fixed mind. So at this point, then, we begin talking about some different ideas in regard to the nature of path. Fix one thing. He says, on the one hand, authentic presence is the result of a gradual developmental process of letting go of ego fixation. But on the other hand, it's also the result of an instantaneous, magical process of letting go of fixed mind. And at this point, he says these two always work together. The abrupt and spontaneous process that brings authentic presence is Windhorse, or raising lungta, which is a practice that he introduced as part of the graduate levels of Shambhala training. But basically, raising lungta is a way of working with energy very directly to wake up and to bring ourselves into the present moment with energy and clarity and vibrancy. As he says, it's rousing the energy of basic goodness into a wind of delight and power. And he says that the raising Windhorse is a way to cast out depression and doubt, that it's a magical process for transcending doubt and hesitation in order to invoke tremendous wakefulness in our state of being. So again, this was a practice that he introduced in the graduate levels after the 5 levels of Shambhala training. But I think we can have some sense of what it is just in the flashes and of experience we have when we wake up and we're really able to let go. There is a quality of intensifying to raising Windhorse, which is a bit different. But the basic idea is to be fully present, fully awake, and to experience the vibrancy and immediacy, the freshness of the present moment. As he says, your experience of authentic presence may be only a glimpse. And to sustain that glimpse and manifest presence fully, there's a need for discipline. So there's also a developmental process for deepening and furthering authentic presence, which is called the warrior's path of the 4 dignities. And again, this path is connected with how to incorporate more and more space into our world so that ultimately we can achieve the realization of the universal monarch. As our world becomes more and more vast, obviously any notion of self-centered, egotistical existence becomes increasingly remote. So the 4 dignities are, as we read tonight, meek, perky, outrageous, and inscrutable. And each one is connected with a particular animal representation. Tiger is connected with meek. A snow lion is connected with perky. The Garuda is connected with outrageous. And the dragon is connected with inscrutable. Unfortunately, I have a low-tech way of showing this, but when I traveled to Bhutan in 2018, I was very surprised to see that many, many houses had tiger, lion, here it goes, tiger, lion, Garuda, dragon painted on their side. So this is not just a Shambhala thing. I also want to point out the windows. The structure of the windows in many of the houses there is supposed to reflect the head and shoulders, good head and shoulders of the Buddha. So that the idea is when light comes in, it's literally the Buddha radiating into your home. In any case, tiger, lion, Garuda, dragon. And he says that all human beings experience the 4 dignities in some form. And this comes back again to the idea that what we're talking about in Shambhala is human experience. It's human potential. It's what we all have, whether we recognize it or not. And that we experience some aspect of the 4 dignities at different times, or we can throughout our lives. As he says, although everyone has some experience of these expressions of energy, unless there's an actual discipline, there's no fundamental sense of going forward in our life. And the four dignities are buried as part of your habitual pattern. So I think that's what we're working with in the beginning, is the four dignities are buried as part of habitual pattern. We don't recognize, we don't identify, we're not able to rest in this experience, but we're being shown our potential here, so that they're buried in our habitual pattern rather than becoming a path toward egolessness. So they have to be connected to the path of warriorship. And in fact, as he says, this is an advanced stage of the path. And he goes on to say that this is somewhat paradoxical, that the four dignities are a process for developing authentic presence. And the experience of authentic presence is what allows the path of the four dignities to unfold. So again, whatever glimpse or flash we have of authentic presence is or basic goodness, wakeful mind, awareness, is what inspires us on the path. And at the same time, through the path we unfold, we open up to, are increasingly able to identify with, increasingly able to recognize and become familiar with our basic goodness, our capacity for authentic presence, for being fully here, without any doubt or without any hesitation. He goes on to say, in regard to a paradox, to explain that somewhat, we could simply say that egolessness is both the ground and fruition. Unless we have some sense of letting go of ourselves, we cannot make this journey of warriorship at all. On the other hand, once we have let go, then we find that we can incorporate greater vision and greater mind. So egolessness is the thread that runs through the entire journey. And he says that at this stage, the warrior's journey is based on resting in the state of warriorship rather than struggling to take the next step. It's a question of resting in the state of warriorship rather than struggling to take the next step, which is essentially what we experience in meditation practice, where we're able to, at least for a moment, settle into present awareness. And without struggling to take another step, without trying to create anything different, then in that moment, we're able to begin to experience something of authentic presence, something of what it means to let go and simply be in the present moment. So the warrior's journey is based on resting in the state of warriorship rather than struggling to take the next step. The warrior experiences a sense of relaxing in his or her achievement, which is not based on ego-centered concerns, but on resting in unconditional confidence, free from aggression. He says the journey is like a flower unfolding, a natural process of expansion. And so a part of what we come to see in this journey, again, is that what we're actually working with, what we're actually experiencing is our true nature. And that what we're actually allowing to happen is our true nature, which is fundamentally awake, fundamentally compassionate, fundamentally clear, fundamentally open. We're just allowing that to unfold, as he says, like a flower, that we don't have to add something or create something that we don't have. We just have to let go so that we can be who we are. And as part of that letting go is recognizing that when it occurs, recognizing that possibility and being able to simply let go into that experience. So with that, he begins talking about the warrior of meek. He says meek means resting in a state of simplicity, being uncomplicated and at the same time approachable. So as I said, I wanted to share some of my research into word meanings. I looked up the word meek, which has several different meanings, including some that are somewhat negative. But basically, the origin of meek in English comes from an Old Norse word, which I can't begin to pronounce, that means gentle. Although perhaps a fuller understanding comes from the Greek origin, which is translated as strength under control. In ancient Greece, war horses were trained to be meek, strong and powerful, yet under control and willing to submit. So I think this is, I think, more of what Trungpa Rinpoche means in saying that meekness is the first quality of the warrior. Meekness develops out of shamatha vipassana practice through our ability to let go and simply be present, to allow ourselves to settle and allow our awareness to expand and just being able to rest in awareness when it occurs. He says, with the warrior meek extends a sense of kindness to himself and mercy to others. So again, there's a real sense of gentleness with meekness, a real sense of non-aggression, non-judgmentalness, both toward ourselves and toward others. He says, altogether, your mind is not filled with ordinary preoccupations, and you're never seduced by trivial situations. This is because your awareness allows you to refrain from activities that dim the vision of the great eastern sun. So here again, we're talking about emptying out, letting go, being free of fixation, being free of reference point, being free of clinging to identity, and just simply being in present experience without reference point, without the need for a reference point. He says that the meekness has 3 stages. The first stage is modesty, or being modest, meaning that our mind is never bloated by arrogance, poisonous arrogance. Meaning essentially that we're open, that we're not so caught up or so full of ourselves that we can't be open to the world around us. That modesty means feeling true and genuine. Therefore, the warrior feels self-contained with no need for external reference points for confirmation. And he also says that with modesty, that there's an underlying brilliance that is experienced because the warrior's awareness shines out with tremendous inquisitiveness, tremendous curiosity. There's a keen interest in everything around us. You begin to see things, he says, you begin to see things as natural messages rather than as a reference point for your existence. I'll read that again. You begin to see things as natural messages rather than as reference points for our existence. So long as we relate to the world around us from the point of view of clinging to existence, clinging to ego, clinging to an identity, clinging to cocoon, as we talked about earlier, then we miss the messages that the world presents to us. We're not open to the sacredness of the world around us. So letting go of being full of ourselves, basic modesty, so that we can be inquisitive and open is an important part of this stage of the warrior's journey. He says the difference here is that the warrior's inquisitiveness is always joined with discipline. The second stage is the expression of unconditional confidence. So it's confidence that's not based on having something or achieving something that we cling to, but it's simply confidence that comes from being fully awake in the moment. And this is where we have the analogy of a tiger in its prime that moves with heedfulness, walks with mindfulness, is relaxed, that its watchfulness is accompanied by relaxation and confidence, and that this meek confidence is a natural state of awareness and mindfulness in the way that we conduct our affairs. The third stage of the warrior of meek, of the experience of meekness, is that there's no hesitation. Because there's no hesitation, the warrior's mind is vast. Vastness comes from seeing the greatness of your own spot, your own particular place. Vastness comes from seeing the greatness of our own spot, our own particular space. So we experience vastness here and now when we're present. We could experience this right now, being fully present. With this, we realize that our basic state of mind is no longer an issue. Our both ambition and poverty mentality overcome. Vast mind, because it's not anchored or caught up in any particular reference point, also comes from sharing the vision of the Dralas. We're able to jump into this vast and powerful ocean of magic. He goes on to say that the fruition of meekness is that because the warrior possesses extraordinary exertion, she or he is able to accomplish whatever purposes or objectives they're trying to fulfill. And this comes from basically being fully present, being completely precise in regard to our mindfulness, and completely awake and aware and inquisitive in regard to our awareness. Therefore, we're able to get things done. We're able to attend to things properly instead of being scattered, or instead of becoming aggressive in goal orientation, or any of the other things that occur when we lose our seat and lose our mindfulness. The sense of exertion, he says, is not speedy or aggressive or heavy-handed. Like the tiger in the jungle, we're both relaxed and energized, inquisitive, but our awareness is disciplined so that we accomplish every activity without difficulty, and we even inspire others to do the same. He says the warrior of Meek has abandoned gain, victory, and fame, that we're not dependent on feedback because we have no doubt about ourselves. We don't rely on encouragement or discouragement and have no need to display our valor to others, or anything in particular to others. When we raise Windhorse, we feel good and trust ourselves. And he says, meekness provides vast vision and confidence. The beginning of the journey is this natural ground of fulfillment that does not need to beg from others. I'll take a moment to catch my breath. And then I want to share something from a different tradition, the Taoist tradition, that I think kind of gets at this same idea of letting go, emptying out, and in particular, giving up ideas of gain, victory, and achievement. And this comes from a Taoist text by Li Tzu, not Lao Tzu, Li Tzu, on the value of emptiness. And again, I think it says the same thing we've been studying all along, but somewhat different language. Someone asked Li Tzu, why do you value emptiness? Li Tzu said, most people like to be praised. They feel good when their accomplishments are acknowledged. However, I feel we would be better off if we were empty of attachments and not imprisoned by recognition, approval, and disapproval. In the long run, we'd have fewer things to worry about. That's why I value emptiness. Li Tzu paused and then continued, even if you were given credit for doing something, you should realize that it was not entirely your own doing. Events occur because conditions are right, and your action only contributes to one of the many conditions. We are so accustomed to thinking that when things happen, they are our accomplishments. We don't understand that there is actually nothing to accomplish. Therefore, rather than accept credit that does not belong to anyone, why not quiet down and think about the workings of heaven and earth? Seeing the emptiness of things can help us cultivate stillness and peace of mind. If you do not know how to keep still in this crazy world, you'll be drawn into all kinds of unnecessary trouble. You lose your view of the Tao, and when you realize it, it will be too late, for losing the way, you will have also lost yourself. Chuang Tzu once told the story about two persons who both lost a sheep. One person got very depressed and lost himself in drinking, sex, and gambling to try to forget his misfortune. The other person decided that this would be an excellent chance for him to study the classics and quietly observe the subtleties of nature. Both men experienced the same misfortune, but when one man lost himself because he was too attached to the experience of loss, while the other found himself because he was able to let go of gain and loss. So different tradition, but I think saying the same thing about emptying out, letting go, not being caught up in reference point, not being caught up in identity, and simply being open to the world, inquisitive about the world, and letting go of notions of gain, victory, achievement, and so on. Anyway, so the next step is the warrior Perky, which is symbolized by the snow lion, enjoying the freshness of the highland mountains. And basically, this is experienced as vibrant, energetic, and youthful. And this refers to unconditional cheerfulness, which comes from ongoing discipline. The warrior Perky, discipline is not a demand, but a pleasure. And again, Perky, definition of Perky is cheerful and lively, full of energy, exuberant. There are two stages of Perky. The first is experiencing an uplifted and joyful mind. This is very much like some of the slogan practice that we studied back with when we read the Mahayana text. Importance of just simply being joyful. so that if we lose our sheep, we don't get lost in gambling, drinking, and so on and so forth. Uplifted mind means a continual state of delight that is not caused by anything. And at the same time, this experience of joyful mind comes from meekness, what we previously experienced. So it's unconditional, but because, again, we don't recognize our capability, our potentiality, we don't recognize who we truly are, we need a path to help us come to that recognition. So the experience of delight and joy and energy is unconditional. And yet at the same time, we come to recognize that through the path of meekness. The modesty, mindfulness, and brilliance of meek bring a natural sense of delight. Furthermore, a warrior Perky develops artfulness in whatever actions they perform. Their actions are always beautiful and dignified. And then in the second stage, the warrior of Perky is never caught in the trap of doubt. The fundamental doubt is doubting ourselves, which occurs when body and mind are unsynchronized. And so with this, I just went back to chapter 5, as it kind of recommends in the text, and just a few sentences that I think get at doubt and absence of doubt. In chapter 5, which we read weeks ago, absence of doubt is trusting in the heart, trusting ourselves. Being without doubt means you've connected with yourself, that you have experienced mind and body synchronized together. It's also connected with how we synchronize with the world. And he goes through the examples of looking and then seeing, hearing and listening, touching and feeling, that we can actually, because we develop a sense of mindfulness and presence, that we can not just look at our first interpretation, our first projection, but actually see, actually connect with the vibrant freshness of reality. As he says, either you look and see beyond language as first perception or projection, or we see the world through the filter of our thoughts. So in any case, doubt, he says, doubt can manifest as anxiety, jealousy, arrogance, it's worse, slandering others, because we doubt our own confidence. But the warrior of Perky rests in the state of their confidence. And the reason for that, again, is recognition and trust in, identification with our fundamental basic goodness. That's one definition of confidence, is the feeling that we can rely on something. And what we're relying on is what we are, our basic goodness, our authentic presence, our fully awake, our capacity to be fully awake at any moment. We experience with the warrior Perky experiences no doubt, and because of that, they never enter the lower realms. The lower realms refer to living purely for survival. And as we remember, perhaps from our study of the realms when we studied some of the Buddhist texts, basic idea of the lower realms is they're characterized by intense passion or hunger, actually, aggression, or thick ignorance, so that it's very difficult, if not impossible, to experience a gap until the energy of the realm wears off. So that when we enter this state of Perky, we're completely free from that, because we identify with our basic goodness. We identify with our awake nature. And so we don't fall into being so completely absorbed in passion, aggression, and ignorance, which are the seed of the lower realms, that we don't get stuck there. Because the warrior Perky is free from doubt and practices continuous discipline, they're free from the lower realms and possess the goodness of the higher realms, which refers to being clear and precise. The warrior is always aware and never confused as to what to accept and what to reject. Again, there's clarity and precision, which is what allows us to know what to accept and what to reject, or as what some teachers say, what to accept, what to reject, and what to adopt. He says the further journey of Perkiness is based on meekness and gentleness. The warrior of Perky is never caught in the trap of doubt and is always joyful and artful. Because we're never enslaved in the lower realms, there's no confusion or dullness. The fruition of Perky is that you achieve a wholesome body and mind, and synchronization of the two. The warrior of Perky is both humble and uplifted, as well as fundamentally youthful. So that's what I came prepared to say. I think I'll turn it over to John at this point to continue our journey through the the four dignities, the path of warriorship.
And where's John?
Interesting. Well, while we're waiting,
There he is. You're muted, John.
Okay, sorry. Welcome everyone again. This is such profound material, and having to do with authentic presence. That word in Tibetan, wangtang, literally means field of power. Wang is power, and tang means field or area of. It's a word that's used a lot in different contexts. And we're being invited to enter into a field of power. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that these descriptions are of what is real compared to the confusion and ignorance that ostensibly we reside in. On the other hand, what is being described in these descriptions, tiger, lion, Garuda, dragon, wangtang, field of authentic presence, power, is the norm for enlightened beings who are infinite in number. We think that we're so numerous and enlightened beings are rare. But that's because we focus on ourselves as discrete entities. From the point of view of the Buddhas, we are of limited number, whereas they fill the cosmos. And so they looked at us as these poor, suffering individuals who have become lost in confusion and have separated or lost touch with the world of reality. These teachings are trying to bring us back into this real world. I also want to share with you, if you haven't seen these already, some pictures. This is the logo for the Buddhist organization that Trungpa Rinpoche created called Vajradhatu. This bird you can see here with the beak and the wings, and he's got claws that's holding this slogan down here, is the Garuda. And he's holding pictures of the four dignities. Down here in the lower right corner is the tiger. To the left, in the lower left corner, is the lion, the snow lion, which roams the Himalayas. To the upper left is the Garuda again, and to the right is a dragon. So these are the four dignities: tiger, lion, Garuda, dragon. Here's another version of the same thing. Let's see if we can get it. Maybe not. Well, here's another one. Let's see if I can get this to change. You might have to be satisfied with just this. There are many more. You can just Garuda dragon. You'll find them, and I'm having difficulty getting them to display. I'm sorry.
You froze for a while there, John. You're muted.
You're,
Can't hear you.
Oh, we have a problem. You may need to disconnect.